Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Don't Look Now, Volume 1, Story Number 1. When I was 16, my parents bought a vacation home in the North Georgia mountains. My wife and I still very much enjoy spending weekends up there, but we aren't the only ones there. Since we purchased the cabin, we have experienced strange happenings inside the cabin, but mostly outside on the surrounding land. The house is small, one story consisting of a kitchen, living room, two bedrooms, each with their own bathroom, and a finished basement used for storage. Ever since we bought the house, no one we have over for the weekend will sleep in the guest bedroom. Waking up in the morning and finding friends or relatives sprawled on the couch or the floor became a common sight. When asked why they were sleeping there and not in the perfectly good bed, the answer was always the same: I did not feel safe in that room. Some friends even saying they heard someone pacing back and forth. The girlfriend of one of my friends once woke me up screaming in the middle of the night. When I ran in their room, she was white as a ghost, no pun intended, and said that if we didn't take her and her boyfriend home, they were going to start walking the 120 miles back to our hometown. Now, I haven't ever experienced anything in there, but I've never slept in there. Just walking into the room creeped me out, so I completely believed what my friends were telling me without question. Most of the activity, however, happens on the surrounding land and has increased since I got married to my wife, who goes up there with me when we can afford to get away for a little bit. Such occurrences happened when she was keeping me company outside on the screen porch while grilling steaks for us to eat. I remember her asking how long I cooked them on each side, and then she stopped talking, and we both heard what sounded like a little girl skipping while humming Pop Goes the Weasel. I was smoking a cigarette and inhaled badly, so I doubled over coughing. The humming then stopped, and we both heard a little girl say, "Stop that," before she continued on her humming, fading out as she reached the other side of the house. Now, I've only been actually terrified once up there, when once again my wife decided to spend the weekend with me, and we were still dating at this time, and we were looking forward to having a weekend vacation. We were fine the entire way up there, laughing, joking, calling out idiot drivers, basically having a good time. When we got there, however, our demeanors changed instantly. The air outside was heavy, and we hurriedly unloaded the car so we could get inside. But it wasn't much better inside the cabin either. My wife going as far as to say, "Something kind of feels off." I shrugged what she said and brought the last load of clothes inside. From that point on, we were at each other's throats, screaming and fighting like we never had before. It was around this time I started to have images pop into my head. Violent images of me standing over my wife with a bloody knife in my hand, or a still shot of me holding a smoking rifle while my wife was bleeding out on the floor. This continued for hours. As I'm not a complete psychopath, these images really bothered me. But how could I tell my wife that I'd been seeing images of me brutally killing her over and over again? I kept quiet about them. We were still fighting on and off, and not being able to stand the constant barrage of brutal imagery, I asked if we could go to bed. It was only 8 p.m., very early for us to go to bed, but she said, "Yeah, but let's clean this up so we can leave first thing tomorrow morning and I can get out of this freaking relationship." We both thought we were breaking up the next day. Around 9:30, I was almost asleep when my wife grabbed my arm and said that she heard the guest room door open. I told her the house was over 20 years old and it made the noises. She seemed to calm down until she grabbed my arm and said, "Dude, I swear to God, someone is standing right outside the door." I'd never seen her look so scared, so I grabbed my rifle, opened the door crack before kicking it as hard as I could, which I hoped would startle whoever was on the other side of the door, perhaps even knock them down. There was no one there, but the door of the entertainment center were wide open. The drawers on it were open in a downward stair-step pattern. We certainly did not leave the house this way before going to bed. so I'm operating on the assumption that someone is in the house and is screwing with us. I moved to the kitchen and found every cabinet wide open, the dishwasher open, the oven open, and the fridge and freezer doors open as well. I called my wife to come to me and help me clean this up, saying that we had a serious problem and needed to clean this shit up and leave. We cleaned the house back up, and she went to wait in the car while I locked up. And while I was locking up, I heard insane laughter coming from inside the house. I finished locking up and ran to the car. We didn't go back up there for another year, and the only reason we did is that I got tired of being called a coward by my father-in-law. We still go up there from time to time and have never experienced anything like that night since. Next story. Well, I used to live in a small town called Everett, Washington, in an apartment named North Creek, and there's this huge plot of woods, and my apartment was on the B building, the bottom floor, and I slept in the living room, and there was this tiny window that overlooked the woods. It always creeped me out, and while everyone knew it was haunted and everything, we still went out there airsofting. But one day, I was dressed in full Vietnam-era tiger stripe camo head to toe in the era's military gear and rifle, and I was sitting in a thick bush with camo face paint on. I was completely hidden, but then this girl, she must have been 23-ish, crossed through the creek. She turns her head towards me and says, "You shouldn't be here." And me being kind of befuddled, I just sat there hidden, staring back at her, and she just walked deeper into the woods, so I just waited to ambush my friends. So fast forward to a couple of weeks, I walked to Mariner High School, where I graduated almost a year and a half later, and I met my girlfriend, and let's call her Ash, for her band concert. When I looked across the street to a fenced-off pond with an island in the middle, and I swear to God, I see the same girl on the island, and I panicked. But I didn't tell Ash about it because I'm thinking, well, how do I explain that? Fast forward, it's the beginning of the summer. My best friend, we'll call him Joseph Stalin. So let me tell you, Joseph and me are not small. He's 6'1", 119-pound Mexican, and I'm 5'11", 103 pounds German guy. But that evening, we were walking through the woods with my combat machete, and it was getting dark, so we started to walk back to my apartment, and we reached the street when I realized my wallet had fallen out when we sat down, so I made the mistake of going back by myself. So it's already dark as hell in there, but I find my wallet because it was bright green, and I'm walking back to the road in my apartment, but then I hear walking to the south of me, and of course I look to see who's there, and it was the same girl in the same clothes. And at that point I thought, is she a junkie? Well, I unholstered my machete and started to yell at her to get the hell out of there and never come back, but she just stood there 30 feet away staring at me. So I walked forward about 10 feet towards her, and she just turned to the west and walked behind a tree that's about 3 feet thick. So I'm waiting for her to appear on the other side when all of a sudden, and I swear to God, I'm not lying, a very tall, must have been 7 or 8 foot tall human wolf hybrid standing on 2 legs came out from behind the tree. There was no more girl, and I didn't even wonder what had happened to her because I booked it out of there. And Joseph is like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Didn't you hear me yelling?" And he replied saying it was dead silent, and he was at the road. Needless to say, didn't go back there for a while. My second best friend, who lived on the other side of the apartment, he was the one who did airsofting with me in those woods. We'll call him Jay. Well, he had gone off to Minnesota with his sister for the summer, so I had completely forgotten about the woods. Then around July, August, they came home, and he has a girlfriend, Heaven, and 2 guys also that they brought into the airsofting thing. And so we're in the woods, and a couple of hours passed by, and we ran out of ammo, and Heaven was the ammo depot, so Jay and me were walking back to her on the trail as it lead back from the creek, when I hear someone walking behind us to the left in the thick bushes. So I assume it's some teen sneaking into the woods to have sex, so I pay no mind to it. Then it stopped. But also the birds and the bugs stopped making noises, and we were walking past what I think is cattails because it was like a foot taller than us and brownish color, and I'm not even like 15 inches from it when we hear something that will haunt me to this day. About 1 foot away from us, we hear a stereotypical witch's cackle, like the one you hear on Halloween. But this one was so loud it shut Jane and me up, and we stopped dead in our tracks and looked in the very thick cattails, and we just ran as fast as we could to the other guys in heaven, which were obviously scared shitless, so they asked what was wrong. And we said, "Didn't you hear that?" And they said no, but decided it was time to call it a day. And a couple of days later, Joseph and I talked to this Vietnam vet who was Native American who lived at the apartments, when he said it sounded like a Native American demon who protects basically graveyards or mass graves. But he also said there weren't any Native American cemeteries near here, and the fact that she was white, so his best guess was that we encountered a ghost of a witch, which was probably one of the first settlers to settle north of Seattle. And I never decided I wanted to find out whether this story was true or not. Next story. My sisters and I got a call that our grandmother's health had taken a turn for the worse. This was in about 2009, a week before Halloween. The doctors were calling the family in. My grandmother was in Lagrange Hospital and we were in Newman. It would take us 30 to 45 minutes to get there. Each of us 4 girls took off from work and we all met at my house where we would ride together to the hospital. Being in such a hurry, neither of us took time to use the bathroom. So by the time we got together and we arrived, me and my baby sister were about to bust. We got parked and Kelly, my sister, and I ran into the hospital and then straight for the bathroom. The entrance that we took, we had to walk through the double doors and turn slightly to our right, then slightly to our left before heading down a long corridor. The corridor led us to a gift shop that sat on the right. Just before the gift shop, there were 2 small bathrooms, one for men and one for women, to the left of the hall. My sister and I were racing to the bathroom when we saw an elderly woman in front of us. She was about 25 feet away from us. She was stooped over a tad and wore an old, outdated black coat and an old black hat with a flower attached to the side of the hat. It wasn't cold enough outside to wear a coat. The old woman entered the bathroom and my sister and I raced in after her. The bathroom was so small that it only had 2 stalls and 1 sink, and 3 people would be considered a crowd. My sister beat me to the second stall after she saw the old woman into the first stall and heard her lock the stall. My sister and I were laughing at each other and we were talking to each other while my sister was in the stall. I was fussing at her for beating me to the only available stall. So here I was standing outside the first stall waiting for the old woman to come out. All of a sudden, the door to the first stall slowly creaked open, and I stepped to the side so that the old woman could get out. I told you that bathroom was very small. After a few seconds, no one came out, and I peeked around and pushed the door open a little bit more. I was scared that I may find the old lady sitting in the toilet and that she had let the door come open or something, and we would find ourselves in an awkward moment. I looked into the stall and no one is there. My sister was still in the second stall and I said, "Kelly, wasn't that old woman in this other stall?" My sister replied with a yes. "And why?" I said, "Kelly, she's not here." "What do you mean she's not in there? I saw her go in." And I'm telling her, "Well, she has either gone down the toilet or she's disappeared." "Did you see her go out?" Kelly, she'd have had to bump me to get out, and no, she did not go past me. The conversation went on like this for a few more seconds, ending with my sister coming out of the second stall fast as lightning with her pants half buttoned. Flying toward the door, she turned to me and asked if I was coming, and I responded that I had business to take care of. Of course, my sister left me there alone while I took care of business in the first stall. I was either feeling brave or stupid that day. After I came out of the bathroom, my sister was waiting for me by the gift shop. We knew we had just had a ghostly encounter. Retelling the story to the rest of our family members had them thinking we were off our rocker. I retold the story again to the nurse who was assigned to my grandmother, and she confirmed that there have been several ghost sightings in the hospital. Next story. Soon after we were married, my husband and I moved into a small little 2-bedroom home in our small town. The landlords had just purchased a property and we were very shocked to find out the rent was extremely low. It wasn't the best house and really needed some work, but it could have easily made more money per month than they were offering. Naturally, after checking out the place, we decided to jump on the offer and lease the place out. Our landlord was an older woman who was known to stretch the truth for a dramatic effect. So when she informed me the house was haunted, I assumed she was just making it up. Her story was that the previous owner had been a middle-aged woman who became a shut-in and was a depressive eater. She was almost 400 pounds when she died, and her son sold the property to our landlord. I was warned as our landlord left us in our new house for the first time to not piss her off. We settled into our new lodgings quite nicely and began our new life as excited newlyweds. The story about the house being haunted was now just a funny party joke, and other than that didn't really come up in conversation or even through my mind that often. But as weeks turned into months in our new home, something wasn't right. We were trying to conceive and having trouble doing so. My depression began to spiral out of control. I began leaving the house less and keeping to myself. That's when the first signs of anything amiss in the house came into view. At first it was just as simple as knowing we had locked the door and it was opening and shutting by itself. I'd shrug it off, telling myself it was just the wind, even when no breeze was present. The dogs would stare and growl at nothing, hair standing on end. They're just antsy dogs, I'd tell myself. Then came the electrical problems. It was an old house. That was the only way to explain the lights flickering off and on at random times. It could even explain why, when we were in bed one evening with all the lights off, the bulb began to illuminate and go out on its own. All these instances I found a logical explanation for. But then things got increasingly weirder. A shadow of a large woman on the wall in the kitchen. The microwave and fridge doors opening and shutting by themselves. Oven turning on and off, settings being changed, and after having it as expected, there was no electrical issues found. At this point, I felt uneasy, but still unsure of what I was seeing, even though I was seeing it with my own eyes. On one particular bad evening, during the height of my depression, my husband and I were arguing in the kitchen. There were a few boxes of wine glasses stacked top of one another against the bottom of the counter, ready to be donated. As we were yelling, my husband and I both watched the top box of wine glasses go straight up in the air and then directly parallel with the floor, slamming into the wall as if someone had just thrown them clear as day. The sad thing is, I went to my pastor basically to tell him I was losing my mind, but he proceeded to tell me there were spirits in the Bible and that it was absolutely a possibility there was a spirit in my house. Totally not what I was hoping to hear. Needless to say, we moved shortly after. We've driven past the house several times and it still has this dark, eerie vibe to it, even in the daytime. Looking back, I think the ghost lady saw me getting depressed, shutting the outside world out, and didn't want me to end up like her. I think she was mad because she saw me taking the same path she did. I just hope she finds peace one day. Or on the other hand, maybe she was just trying to possess me. Next story. This happened on the island of Kauai. I don't know why I went to investigate, but I kept feeling drawn to the location. The old caretaker cottage is a dilapidated building sitting in the middle of nowhere. There used to be electrical wires connected to a wood pole, but there is no power to the building any longer. The first time I drove by, I wasn't aware it was there. In fact, I had driven past it for years. It was isolated off a small turnabout, and there was never a reason to drive up that way. I feel silly admitting I never knew it was there, but I wasn't. When I use the word called, I mean I was summoned. By who or why, I don't know. This is not something I go out of my way to do. If I had a choice, I would never check out an empty building. This was different. It had a lonely quality connected to it. I stared at it for a while before I wandered over to get a closer look. I made sure I looked it over in the daylight, and by it I mean the cottage. It looked like it was about to collapse in on itself. It was a pathetic little house. It had one living area, no bedroom, and a tiny outhouse on one side. There appeared to be a small kitchen or laundry area on the other side of the building. A wood pole jutted straight up into the air. it looked oddly out of place. The area was a junkyard of old cars, thrown out rubbish, and abandoned furniture. I felt so sad just looking around. How could anybody have lived here? I am certain it must have been a lonely existence. There aren't any homes around, and the nearest property was a cemetery across the road on the other side of the street. I think I understood now. Maybe this little house was a caretaker's home, overseeing the cemetery. I wondered what his story was. Somehow I knew it was a male entity pulling me there. I don't know how, I just knew. I carry my camera wherever I go, and I decided to take a photo. And it was a unique building, and I wanted to look at it later, study it, try to figure it out. It would take me a couple more weeks before I returned. The final visit, and I say final for good reason, came on an evening around 9 p.m. That is what I saw that night. Driving around, the air felt charged with energy. It was a beautiful evening, and the air was still. The trade winds had stalled, and I could hear every bug, every toad, every cricket. It was magical. To my left, the ocean pounded against rocks and cliffs. I could smell the salty seawater, and it invigorated my senses. My skin was tingling with anticipation, and I didn't know where I was headed. I just drove along, waiting for a signal to stop. I found myself near the cemetery, and then I turned down to the dirt road leading to the place I called the caretaker's cottage. It was disorienting. There are no lights along the street. It's completely black in there, and you feel like you're driving through a cave. My headlights penetrated the darkness to a degree, but I couldn't see beyond the light. It felt as though the light was being gobbled up by a hungry blackness. It was unnerving, to say the least. It was so quiet. I could hear the gravel and dirt beneath my tires. I felt like I was making so much noise. Pulling to a stop along the caretaker's cottage, I didn't dare step out of the truck. Instead, I grabbed my camera and started snapping away. My heart was beating rapidly, but I wasn't scared. There was this feeling I would finally get some answers in that oily darkness. I was right. By picture number 4, I started to hear footsteps coming from the inside of the building. Only I didn't see anything. I could feel him there, and I took another picture. A kind of hostile yell, I can't describe it, came from the right of the building. It was a man's voice, but I couldn't tell what he was saying. One thing I couldn't miss, that was the anger emanating from that voice. He was beyond angry. It was then I heard him step outside and start to walk toward my truck. I backed away as quickly as I could. Driving away in my truck, all I could think about was the photos. Would I get to see him in any of the pictures? I drove straight home and pulled a disc from my camera. Plugging it into the computer, I waited to see what images popped up on the screen. To my surprise, I found myself looking into the face of a very angry man. It was the last photo taken. The ghostly caretaker has his mouth open as if he was saying something, which he was. One hand was balled into a fist, and you can clearly see his fingers. The other hand is being held up to his upper chest area. The rest of his body didn't manifest. His face and hands are sickly white. I remember trying to take a last photo, but the batteries were already drained. Ghosts will do that to electrical items. The next day I asked the local police about the caretaker cottage, and they didn't know who had lived there or why the building was there. Many of the local people who had grown up in the area always remembered it as being there, in that same horrible, sad condition. No one remembered a caretaker living there. Growing even more frustrated, I wondered why I was led there. It was obvious. This ghost man didn't want any help from anybody. I think he just wanted to remind someone, anyone, he did exist. Next story. I live in a 2-story house where the houses are all connected in rows upon rows. You could hear your neighbors through the wall if they were having loud sex, which happens occasionally. We were a family of 5. I've got 2 sisters, and when we first moved in, we used to all sleep in a room together, while my parents would be in the master bedroom. Things started getting weird when our parents would wake up to us sleepwalking in circles right outside of our rooms. What is creepy is that the sleepwalking would happen one by one to each of us, from eldest to the youngest kid, so they would have to put us back to bed one by one. After a while, it was decided the whole family would sleep together, and the sleepwalking stopped. Something was really wrong with that house, but most of the activity seemed to originate from that room. We were young then, and were the youngest kids among our immediate neighbors. The rest were all easily in their high school years. Young as we were definitely no longer infant baby crying age. My youngest sister was by then 4 or 5 years old. No babies in the area, yet in the morning our neighbor would ask us who was crying so late at night from that room. Remember, no one slept there. No babies in the area. Some days, even we could hear the crying while we were all in the master bedroom. Parents would open the door to check, and immediately the crying would stop. I think I may be the most sensitive of all my siblings. Growing up, I would wake up to sounds of marching. I would be able to follow the sound right downstairs to a particular spot in the storeroom where we kept our junk, and I remember even running through all the boxes there to hear the marching sound. I wasn't afraid then, didn't connect the dots that it was military marching, usually daytime after dawn. I really didn't bring up much fear for me. The sound would disappear, much like in the horror films where the intensity in the atmosphere suddenly lifts and then all that's left is a sudden silence. I only connected the dots very much later in high school when I was into scouting and we did a lot of marching. That was when the timing and marching steps made sense to me, and how commands could change the rhythm of the steps. It was also much later, when I was watching Japanese anime, that I realized that the commands I would wake up hearing were Japanese military commands. Add it all up, Malaysia was invaded by the Japanese and they set up camps all over their conquered land. We had a maid to come help out with the cleaning since my mother was pregnant at that time and she was to stay in that room. It was barely a month later when she told us she could no longer stay in the room and would no longer want to work with us. Something about a presence in the room that bothered her in her sleep, and she kept pointing at this spot in the room. We figured it was just an excuse by her to get out of her contract and let her go. Then one day, my uncle came over to stay with us for a few months since he was working in town. My mom would wake up in the middle of the night to noises downstairs, and when she checked, he was just awake down there looking up for old tapes to watch. He said he was tired but was not allowed to stay in that room. He was even afraid to close his eyes. Said each time he tried to close his eyes in there, he would see very gruesome and violent scenes all flashing very quickly, and that it would bring up a very genuine fear as if those dangers were all directed to him. He stayed downstairs for the rest of his stay with us. There had always been a certain stillness in the entire neighborhood, even with all the kids coming out to play in the evening. There is a stillness in the air that once you move out of the area, you can feel a difference. Most of our neighbors had moved away. The houses were rented out as we used to rent them, but many are abandoned now. The neighbors have met up before, and it was only after so many years did we realize that every house had their own resident ghost. The most notable one was our next door neighbor. There was a lady in a red dress who appeared by their bedside crying. All their kids would wake up to see the lady in red. One time, one of their daughter's boyfriend stayed over and he ended up waking up the entire house when he saw the girl crying by his bed. It was not the first time the entire family had been woken up because of the lady in red. The first few encounters, they genuinely thought someone had broken into their home when the red lady was just floating all over the house from room to room, and the family was just trying to locate her. The worst had to be their father, who would be caught sleepwalking. He was a balding man reaching retirement. His wife would catch him sleepwalking to the mirror, sit down, and comb his hair gracefully like how a lady with very long hair would. And that would just go on all night, even if she tried to bring him back to bed. When done, he would just walk back to bed. In Chinese belief, a lady in red is a lady who died unjustly and is seeking retribution. That explains why they always see her crying in their house. It's been almost 15 years since we all moved away. I still go back there once in a while. The atmosphere in the place still has a certain stillness to it, a certain death. We later found out that at a mining pool, a walking distance away from the house, developers were trying to clean it up for a new apartment. While cleaning up, they found many baby remains there. People used to dump babies there. For whatever reason, they did it. Add that up with the Japanese marching, I think we can safely deduce what happened there. Japanese came in, massacred the locals, raped many ladies, as would have happened during the Japanese invasion everywhere. The lady in red might very well have been one of their victims, which would represent the unjust that had been done to her. I believe that there are just paranormal black spots in the world, especially places of great tragedies. You rarely get those superpowered ghosts like in The Conjuring, but rather, more often, they just become a part of your life until you're able to escape from that house, leaving it to someone else to live in. No one should ever be afraid of the unseen in their own home, which is why you should always make sure you don't have a resident ghost.